So last time we took a look at the people surrounding the Borgias. Today we'll be examining the Borgias themselves. As said before, all points go to the superior portrayals, and the previous episode ended in a tie, so all previous examination was completely pointless. Let's begin. While not a Borgia by name, Vanossa had an important part to play in the Borgia legacy, both in the show and real life. As one of Rodrigo's many mistresses, Vanossa was the mother of Cesare, Lucrezia, Juan, and Giovanni Borgia. But, unlike many of Rodrigo's other mistresses, she would actually stay with Rodrigo for many years to raise her children. However, as years began to go on and she began to get up there in age, Rodrigo's desires for her began to diminish, and in there comes Giulia Farnese. Her depiction in Netflix was a kind of retired businesswoman, which was very befitting of her character, as she was a very prominent member in this role. Not always in big parts, but always there to console her children as they went about their lives. While in HBO, we go for less of the retired businesswoman and more of a mother bear figure, which Joanne enjoys this role and loves kicking ass in it.
I banished my husband for your sake!
You are the mother of my children. You will always have a special place in my life.
What about your promise?
And yes, while I'm sure this didn't really happen, I do kind of like the camaraderie between Rodrigo and Vanossa in the HBO version. Again, not very realistic, but hey, it's television. The way these two think of in terms of raising their children is also well addressed. Rodrigo is the traditionalist, always thinking in terms of politics and power, while Vanossa is there to balance them out with more of a motherly perspective. So, all in all, who's best? While Jeremy and Joanne make an amazing duo together, I feel like this is the only time Vanossa's character in the HBO version really does anything. In Netflix, she seemed to have more of a life outside of Rodrigo's papacy, and this in turn leads to a more fleshed out and dynamic character. So, close call, but I'm giving this one to Netflix. Point goes to Netflix. Juan Borgia was the second oldest son of Rodrigo Borgia and widely considered to be his favorite, as Rodrigo wanted, in his own words,
We will have one son in the cloth and one in armor. You know our wishes.
And guess which one he chose for that armor? That's right, the worst fucking choice possible. This, as you can guess, really pissed Cesare off as he was the superior, well, everything. And this carries over to the show, where Cesare is not chosen to be the military leader, even though Juan has zero military experience, no charisma, and no idea what he's fucking doing. In HBO, they take full advantage of this and use several episodes to set up what a pompous, arrogant ass he is, along with setting up a really nice antagonistic relationship between him and his siblings. However, it does feel like the writers at HBO were kind of using Juan as a kind of unlikability sponge. Wanting us to sympathize more with Lucrezia and Cesare, Juan was depicted as doing many of the things historically done by Cesare. The Siege of Forlì. In Netflix, it was Cesare. In HBO, first done by Juan. Killing Lucrezia's lover Paolo. Again, in Netflix, Cesare, HBO, Juan. So like I said, everything unlikable done in the name of the Borgia legacy was basically thrown at Juan's feet. However, this does lead to a rather delicious downhill spiral in the second season, where he gets the clap, gets shot in the leg, and becomes an opium addict. From there he just becomes more and more unstable until finally... In Netflix, his role is somewhat downgraded. Incompetent military leader? Check. Being a pompous, arrogant asshole? Check. Trying to sexually assault his sister? Okay, that's new. Yeah, in HBO, where he was more of an unlikability sponge, in Netflix, Juan is more of a Cesare garnish. He serves absolutely no point in the plot other than to look bad and make Cesare look good. However, I don't think we can fully understand the significance of Juan Borgia without examining his death. So, how was it done? While the details are a bit vague, the actual assassination of Juan Borgia was never really solved. So it's been very heavily debated over the years about who actually was responsible. The three most likely candidates are the Orsini family, his brother Cesare, and his brother Giovanni. The Orsini family because they were family rivals within Rome, Cesare for his position in the papal army, and Giovanni because of his suspected affair he was having with his wife. Netflix, however, does the very interesting thing of Lucrezia killing Juan. Okay. So before we had family rivalry, sibling infidelity, and sibling position of power. So, Lucrezia, why did you kill Juan?
I did not want Juan to go to heaven.
Alright. In HBO, it is built up much better. Cesare kills Juan because of his disgrace to the Borgia name, and to keep Lucrezia from having to do it after he threatens to kill his nephew. And it must be said that the moment leading up to the actual thing is pretty damn intense. You can tell this is a big thing for Cesare. Hell, even Micheletto is shocked.
I stand in awe, Your Eminence. You killed your father. Still, I stand in awe.
Okay, I think we've dissected this enough, and we can come to the conclusion that in all terms, Juan in the HBO version was better. Point goes to HBO. So Lucrezia Borgia is probably one of the most interesting women in history, but also one to be known as the most infamous. It has been said that Lucrezia Borgia had incestuous relations with both her father and her brothers, having many children out of wedlock due to these incestuous, let's call them copulations. It's also been said that while she was married to 3 powerful Italian families, that she acted as a spy for her father, going so far as to even poison some of her father's enemies with a special ring on her finger containing a poison known as cantarella. However, in verified, proven history, most of, if not all of these accusations are false. This, however, did not keep the Netflix version from claiming them as fact. In this version, Lucrezia starts off as this kind of bratty little kid, and the main driving force behind her character in this version is what she wants. She wants to be married, but then the guy's kind of a loser, so then she doesn't. She wants to be a nun, but then she gets kind of horny for Paolo, so then she doesn't. She wants to have a baby, but then her mom kind of talks her out of it, so then she doesn't. What I'm saying is, in the grand scheme of things, Lucrezia Borgia in the Netflix version is not very interesting. 90% of her time is basically taken up by her maturity into womanhood, which had a few interesting ideas, but the way it was handled was pretty dumb. Back in those days, the main thing women had to do is sit around and look pretty, and by God were they stuck, nailed, and riveted to that concept. As said before, most of Lucrezia's time is spent interacting with her husbands. Not to say she never has a shining moment, I mean, hell, the woman's playing an icon, but the majority of her time is either she's in bed sick, doing penance in a nunnery, or in bed with a child, and she has almost zero interaction with other major players in this version other than Cesare, so they can hammer home this forced incest subplot. Yes, never before have I said the words forced incest subplot. And is it just me, or is there something a bit off about how this actress delivers her lines?
So that you can send him away again? Whether stolen or not, my baby is not mine.
Okay, let's talk about the good one now.
If it pleases you.
There's just no way around it. Lucrezia in the HBO version is just better. They do go for the kind of innocence lost characters, but this one at least has plot-related and historical context. She starts off as this kind of sugar pixie covered in honey, and through some very well-paced and very well-done occurrences, she becomes a much stronger female character. It does feel, however, that both versions were slightly fan fiction, like Giulia Farnese. Like how in this version, Lucrezia also has sex with her brother, even though in both versions, they claim it as fact, even though it was never truly verified and based only on public speculation. This version also seemed to want to make Lucrezia Borgia a kind of superheroine, having her seduce the French king to avoid his invasion of Vatican City, which did not happen and was kind of dumb. And while we're on the subject, let's talk about the incest. Both versions have it, but from the beginning, HBO shows how unbelievably close Lucrezia and Cesare are, and given the sheer amount of trials that she's put through in this version, it would kind of make sense that she would gravitate towards someone she's been close to all her life in a romantic and sexual way. Now let's be clear, I'm not saying it's okay, I'm saying it makes more sense. A hell of a lot more sense than...
The whole world whispers that you and I are lovers. Should we prove them right?
Point goes to HBO. Now on to arguably one of the most important people in the entire series, Cesare Borgia. Throughout the series, it's very obvious that Cesare is in fact the main character of these stories more than Rodrigo Borgia, as each series does focus on him more than any other character. Three main differences though that set these portrayals aside is the motivation of the character, the time in which we first see Cesare Borgia, and his mental stability at said time. In HBO, we first meet Cesare as Pope Innocence dies and Tempestate Vacante begins to begin the election of the next pope. In Netflix, we're shown Cesare at a much younger age, a religious scholar near the end of Pope Innocence's life, and he's also battling his desire to become a military leader while his father wants him to become a religious scholar and remain the next pope. Alongside this, Cesare is also batshit fucking crazy. And not like, you know, interesting crazy, more of... HBO took it a different way and made him a nice guy who kills people. This Cesare also being trapped by his father's desire for him to move up in the church and his desire to lead the papal army. I also have to think that the writers at HBO were playing a lot of Assassin's Creed during the time of this production because they kind of turned Cesare into Ezio. Tell me if you think this sounds familiar. For after finding his lover dead, he rallies a group of men on a mission for revenge and then fights in the shadows with stealth and cunning, and you see where I'm coming from here? Another difference between them is how their ascent is played out. Netflix follows Cesare from a very young age, from religious scholar past his father's death into his military ascent and finally its descent ending with his death. This in turn leads to a very extensive arc Cesare has, and I'm afraid to say this is something HBO kind of lacks. Because in HBO, Cesare starts off being a bit of a badass and then ends the series being a slightly bigger badass. One problem I have with the Netflix version though is, as much as they talk up Cesare being this great military leader, I never really saw anything great in him. However, it did feel like the writers at Netflix were really enjoying portraying Cesare as this kind of irredeemable bastard, and then the third season hit and they're like, fuck, shit, this thing has to end soon and people have to care about this guy who we've made a complete asshat of, or this was entirely pointless. So, reboot, reboot, reboot. While I did find the HBO version more enjoyable and easier to watch, I will say that having the Netflix version donate the entire second and third season to his development that probably could have been done in less than one, but nevertheless did lead to a more fleshed out character. So based completely on character development, the point would go to Netflix. However, I realize this is a very long video and I was gonna give the point to Netflix to try and keep the attention artificially high, but can I just say, there's a lot I can take about these shows. I can take the fact that Cesare fucks his sister in both of them. I can take that. I can take the fact that in the HBO version, Cesare is shown fighting off the French army with plaster cannons. God, that was stupid. I can take the fact that in only one of these versions did Cesare ever contract syphilis, and he was never disfigured, as he famously was, and he never donned his iconic mask. I can take that. I can take the fact that the entire third and morbidly obese season of Borgia had us trying to empathize with this incestuous genocidal lunatic. I can take that. I can even take the fact that the ending actually takes place with him fighting about 1,000 guys, crying out his sister's name. But what I cannot take, and what I will not accept, is Borgia's motherfucking ending. Spoilers.
Cesare Borgia is dead.
In the beginning.
What the fuck? Cesare Borgia died in 1507 in Vienna, Spain. He was ambushed by enemy soldiers and was brought down with about a dozen spears. His body was stripped of valuables and armor with only a piece of cloth covering his genitals. Why Netflix would even think that we want to see Cesare Borgia live is beyond me. I was looking forward to this episode so I could finally see this fucker die. But you just couldn't let me have that, could you, Borgia? This ending just spits in the face and is a big middle finger to everyone who sit through this inflated and painfully long third season. So if you ever tell me that Borgia is better because it's more historically accurate, now on to the man, the myth, the legend himself, Rodrigo Borgia. When it came to casting these two voices, you really couldn't have gotten better than Scar from The Lion King and Caesar from Fallout New Vegas. Both of these actors did a tremendously good job at portraying the seductive voice of Rodrigo Borgia, which was very well documented as a facet in his rise to power. That being said though, neither of these portrayals were perfect. Tom Farana, while really looking a lot like Alexander VI, had some vocal issues that kind of rubbed me up the wrong way. His American accent seemed really out of place, and while I know very few people actually had Italian accents in this version, Tom seemed really out there. He seemed like a cowboy lost in Italy for some reason. Jeremy Irons also had a few problems as well. His British accent, while very mesmerizing, did get grating after a while, and neither of their accents really lend themselves to pronouncing Latin too good. That being said though, they really did well in portraying this character because these parts are extremely dialogue heavy, and without these kind of Shakespearean actors, the entire show would have fallen apart. But the biggest difference between these two is how they play Rodrigo Borgia. Jeremy Irons plays Rodrigo as a kind of crooked politician, just trying to look out for himself and trying to keep his empire together, while Tom Farana plays him much more brutal and more like a mob boss. Both of these are very well done for the tone they wish to portray, but both of them also had their downsides. One thing that kind of bothered me was the graphicness. To put it bluntly, I don't want to see these two naked. They're each pushing 60, and I ain't into that. HBO knew this and thankfully kept Jeremy Irons' naked body clothed heavily at all times, while Netflix apparently didn't catch this memo and shoved scene after scene with Tom and his succulent, shriveled old man taint on screen at every chance they could get. Going off the portrayals of Alexander VI alone, I'd say these two would basically break even. However, there were a few things that tipped one above the other. One was emotion. Tom played Rodrigo Borgia as being very stoic and very cold-hearted, which did lead to a bit of a drop-off in his interest after a while. However, they did manage to make up for this by pushing in a lot more trials that he had to overcome. Things like promiscuity, the loss of his son, being addicted to drugs and going through withdrawal. But the problem about the way they handled it was that they treated it as very serious, and with the acting given, it came off as kind of over the top. Jeremy's struggles are often played up for laughs, but however, they do manage to explore a lot more of his character through some very subtle acting. Jeremy has the gift of saying a little but meaning a lot, and being able to show a lot just through emotion and such. For this, I give him the point. So I think it's quite clear that the superior portrayal and the superior version all in all is the HBO version. They did it best. So as I said, HBO wins on their portrayal of the characters alone, so it'd be kind of pointless to try and analyze the story, but I have a system I'd like to stick to, and if you keep with me, I'll reveal my next comparison at the end. Let's begin. The Borgias basically won for three reasons: size, humor, and humanity. While you might think that the format used by the Netflix version would lend itself better to the idea of an Italian crime family, it did miss a few key points. First thing is budget. In order to do a faithful adaptation of the Borgias, you need deep pockets, and this is something that HBO had monstrously superior funds than Netflix, and it shows. The show was actually taken off the air because of the budget, but they pushed that shit on screen and it was amazing. While we have Netflix here having half their conversations taking place on a black sheet in a dark room. I mean, I know this is the Dark Ages for God's sake, but someone light a fucking match. Second thing is humor. I don't care how much of a depressing shithole of a time you lived in. At some time, someplace, something funny happened. Borgia had absolutely zero humor for the first two seasons. This, mixed with its abominably bleak tone, got on your pubes pretty damn fast. HBO managed to weave the humor and the drama in very artfully and managed to make it never feel like a comedy, but never feeling depressing enough to get tiresome. But the biggest gaffe Borgia made was its lack of humanity. When someone does something horrible, you usually have a reason for it. Skynet kills humans because he views them as a threat. Xenomorphs kill humans because of food and reproductive abilities. Cesare Borgia kills humans because
I am Cesare Borgia!
these characters are the most irrational, illogical human beings I have ever seen. They are completely devoid of humanity and human sympathy. It's like you made a period drama starring Jason Voorhees, the T-800, and Sombra. It is interesting, though, that the American version would seem to glorify this papal crime family, while the European version would vilify them. I wonder why that is. So this concludes my very first video of Who Did It Best. Please like and subscribe. These videos took nearly 2 years to make, and I would really appreciate some feedback. Tell me in the comments below who you thought did it best between the Borgias and Borgia. Also tell me why you think the American version would glorify the Borgias while the Netflix version would vilify them. Might be an interesting debate. And as for the subject of my next video, well, I think if you think hard about it, it's elementary, Dr. Watson. I'm Bookmark. Thanks for watching.